thank you everybody for joining us. So my name's Nicola. I'm the program manager for Co-Club, and a lot of you have spoken to before, so hello. I want to thank you so much for joining us for the release of our new agriculture lessons. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, which are the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation. And also the First Nations community up in Murwillumbah, where you guys are, which is the Bundjalung community. And so thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited. And what I'll do next is just hand over to Fiona. Welcome, Fiona.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicola. And again, thanks, kids. It's really exciting to be here. Today, we're talking about how technology is changing farming because, as we've been talking about, growing food and fibre is so important. We all need it. We all eat and we all wear clothing and use fibre in all the things that we do. And so I think it's really important that everybody is understanding of what life on a farm is like at the moment, how we actually do grow the food and fibre, and how technology and coding is actually helping to do that. So first of all, Charlie, we'll go on to the first slide. And, what does a farmer look like? Some of you have been to a farm, most of you have been to a farm, and some of you have already met a farmer. And I think if you look at the cartoons and you look at some of the storybooks and you look online even, and sometimes even if you're looking in a newspaper or on television, you might see a picture that looks a little bit like that. So we have a farmer, he might have a pitchfork, he's always a man, he's always a boy, very rarely a girl, but he has a big hat and he has his overalls. Sometimes he has his chook under his arm or something like that, and he has his gumboots on, and that's sort of how I think the cartoon image of what a farmer is. And sometimes it's really scary because that picture gets embedded in our brains, and when people are thinking of farmers, they actually think of something like that. But for those of you who've actually met farmers, and there was lots of you that had, and Charlie will go on to the other slide, you'll know that in actual fact, farmers just look like me. So I'm a farmer. So here on my farm, as I was saying to you, I'd love to be out in it showing it to you today a little bit, but with the storm I couldn't. But farmers are young, they're old, they're girls, there's boys, there's women, there's men, there's most people who love the countryside because they work in it all the time. There's people who grow veggies like Emma there with the long black hair and holding the cauliflower. She grows vegetables down in Victoria, and she has a little farm shop on her farm that is really cool that sells those vegetables to people as they drive by. Or Natalie over on the far right in her wheat crop, she's from South Australia. So, we all come in all shapes and sizes. We're very diverse. We have lots of different interests. We grow lots of different things. And so it suits lots of different people to be our career in farming or being a farmer. Some of us do wear big hats, that's true. And you can see Natalie and some of the other people in there have got their big hat on. And if you're out in the sun, then that's a really good thing to do because you might get skin cancer and you need to cover up a little bit. But for somebody like Christina in the middle there, she doesn't have a hat on because she mostly works undercover. She's a horticulturalist on the central coast of New South Wales. She grows leafy greens. So she grows spinach and lettuces and kale and things like that. And she's mostly working undercover. So she doesn't actually really need a big hat. And most of them don't carry pitchforks, although some of them do sometimes. There's very few overalls there that you can see. And nobody has a chook under their arm. So when you're actually thinking that, what does a farmer, when you're thinking in the farmers and reading about farmers and thinking about growing food and fibre, then I think that it's really important that you think that they're very diverse, that farmers are just like people that you meet in the street when you're walking around Murwillumbah. They're just like you and me, and you might be walking past one in the street. So here on my farm, we grow crops. And we grow crops like wheat. Right now, we've got wheat that is starting to get ready to harvest, and barley. So wheat, of course, goes into bread. and sometimes it goes into pasta. There's a different variety that goes into pasta, and we grow both of those. Barley that goes to feed chickens and cattle, and also beer. I'm sure that you know about beer, and barley goes into beer. And then also we grow cotton, a little bit of cotton there, and there I am in my cotton crop. And cotton, you know, is a very good crop for us here. It grows in a short period of time, and you can see that I'm in that picture wearing a cotton shirt. And I think looking at the screen, I can see a number of you maybe in your cotton shirts, and of course cotton undies. I'm not going to get you to show me those, but a lot of people wear cotton undies as well. So cotton is something that we grow here in Australia as well, and we're really respected worldwide for growing cotton. And we also have cattle, so we have beef. And it's a mixed farm. There's always something to do on our farm. It's very busy, and I really love being a farmer. So what does farming look like? And again, there's a picture. It was taken in the olden days. And, you know, we've been farming for hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of years. So obviously farming's changing a bit. But again, sometimes when we see and read about farming in the paper, people think about pictures like this, which is really, really wrong. But now it's changed significantly. And today I want to really pick up 7 really cool things that tech is doing and changing the way that we actually operate on farm. And it's one of the reasons that we've actually got so many young people now coming into our industry. So let's launch in and see some of the, only 7 today, but let's launch in and see some of the awesome tech now that's on farms in Australia. First of all there's a picture of a tractor that's driving itself. So, you know, the old pictures of the guys that sit on tractors and they've got dust all around their heads and, you know, they're covered in dust and dirt, and it looks a bit romantic in some ways. But in actual fact, that tractor there is one of the newest models of tractors. And the exciting thing about that is, look, it hasn't even got a seat. It hasn't even got a cab, because nobody actually drives it. It actually drives itself. And how cool is that? So the farmer could be sitting there in his office at home, and he can check in and see how it's going. But in actual fact, it's driving itself. And it's really freeing up farmers to do other important jobs on their farms. But it's also making sure that when we're putting those seeds in the ground, you know, when you put seeds in the ground to grow your wheat or your barley or whatever it is, that you're putting it in at just the right depth so that it grows up beautifully. And you're covering it with just the right amount of soil. And you can keep the crops and the old crops and the nutrients in the soil. So that's really exciting. So the first thing is tractors that drive themselves. Okay, the next thing is robotic dairies. So there's some cows there getting milked. So you know that dairy farmers traditionally, again, it's been a bit of a hard slog. So dairy farmers have been getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they've been milking the cows so that we can all have fresh milk to drink during the day. Whereas now, you know, cows actually can come into these amazing robotic dairies where the machine actually recognizes each cow. So each cow is given a number, and that the number actually corresponds and goes into the software that then that machine knows exactly which, you know, how everything about that cow. So, you know, they know how much food they like. They know what food is the best food for that particular cow. You know, maybe she needs a bit more protein, maybe she needs a bit more carbohydrate. So they give her the feed that she really likes. She might not like a particular food. So the computer has picked all that up, and then it all goes online, and we can see exactly the records about how much milk that cow's delivered, when is she milking, is there anything wrong with it? It can pick up if there's anything wrong with the cow and make sure that she can get helped. So it's robots are really helping dairy farmers these days. So the next thing is, and this one is super cool, and again, we've got one of these on my farm. This is a robot that weeds our crops. So when we have a big crop of, say, wheat, or a big crop of barley, or even chickpeas, I'm sure some of you eat chickpeas, then sometimes it covers a huge amount of land. And so you can't just wander around and hoe up the weeds like you might do in your garden, or you can do if you've just got a small little plot of land. And so what it can do, these machines travel along our crops all the time, and they have this infrared beam. It's super cool. It's so cool, I can't tell you. And they can pick up what is a weed and what is a plant. And when they see a weed, then they actually put the tiniest little spot of weed killer right on that weed, right in the middle of the weed. So it kills the weed and it doesn't kill the plants. And it's not using, we don't want to use more weed killers than we have to. We just want to use the smallest amount of weed killer because it's expensive. And we know that people don't want weed killers on their food. So we use the smallest amount we possibly can, but it keeps the weeds out and it keeps the food growing, and it saves people driving all over that crop, looking for weeds, and it would damage it too if we were driving all over the crop. So these robots actually drive in between the rows, so they don't even flatten all the crops. Very, very, very cool. Okay, the next one is satellites. And the satellites, watch our crops are growing from space. So if you drive into a big crop, you can't always get there because you damage the crop. But we want to be able to see how our crop is growing. We want to see how much moisture there is in the soil. We want to see how advanced it is. And the satellites now actually can talk to our machines so that when we're sowing a crop, for example, putting that crop in the ground, then it can talk to the satellite. The satellite knows exactly what was in that paddock this time last year. As it's growing, it can keep feeding information about that crop. And sometimes, it can really pick up and give farmers real-time information about nutrients that crop might need, or water, or whatever it is that actually really, really help that crop grow from space. So satellites are cool. The next one is, who would have thought it would be possible to grow tomatoes in the middle of the desert? I mean, now this is super cool. So here, this is at Port Augusta. And this tomato farm doesn't look like a tomato farm, does it? I mean, those of you who might think they know tomatoes or have had a go at growing tomatoes in their backyard, it doesn't look like a tomato farm. But this is a fully self-sufficient tomato farm at Port Augusta in South Australia, which is right in the middle of the desert. Mrs. Keogh might show you where it is on a map if you don't know where it is. But it's so dry and it's so deserty. But this particular tomato farm grows tomatoes indoors, so undercover, and it actually creates its own energy. So you can't see power lines or anything there because it creates its own energy from the solar panels that you can see there. And it actually uses seawater. So it desalinates seawater to actually use inside the tomato farm. So it's very, very sustainable. And when we're thinking about, we talk a lot about how much, how can we feed the world? Because Australia actually grows more food than we need here in Australia. And a lot of what we grow is actually sent to other countries to help feed some of those countries. But when we're talking about feeding the world, we will need to look at how we can grow more food. And we can't, there's no point planting tomatoes in the soil in Port Augusta because they just wouldn't grow. It's too hot, too dry. You'd have to use a lot of water. It just wouldn't work. But growing them inside, and there's another inside tomato farm too, a really big one in Guyra in New South Wales that some of you might be a little bit closer to, but it doesn't have quite as cooler energy and water yet. That might develop that, but it hasn't quite got there yet. But at Port Augusta, this one is really cool, and it's allowing us to do amazing things and grow products and grow food and fibre in places that you just never would have thought of. So how cool is that? This is about how we use drones now. And again, we have a drone here on farm. So instead of having to drive out there and make a mess in the paddocks and maybe get bogged, then we can just send a drone up, and we do. And it flies. So we send it off from here at the house, and it flies out and it has a look at the cattle, makes sure none of them are hurt or unwell. And it also, so it has a little fly around and it sends back, we watch the information here on the screen back in the house. And then it also can check the watering points and make sure there's plenty of water for them to drink. And make sure that the fences are good and all of those things. And likewise, we can see, again, it enables us to see the middle of the crops, because you can't drive into the middle of the crops because they're just too big, what's happening in the middle of the crops, and give us and send us that information straight back to the farmer. So drones are very, very cool. And again, they're doing lots of different things. Another thing that's very cool is testing the soil with our iPhones. Now, who would have thought that your iPhone could actually be a mobile little laboratory? But with a little soil probe that you stick into it, then you actually can. And so now we look at the dirt if we're testing. So when we're going to plant a crop, or plant some vegetables or whatever we do, we want to know, what do we need to add to make that crop or to make that food grow best. So we don't want to be having to add chicken manure, for example, which has a lot of phosphorus in it. If we don't need to, maybe the soil's okay for that, but maybe it's missing something like another nutrient like potassium or something like that. So we test the soils and we test to see what sort of nutrients they are, and you can stick a probe in the soil, comes up there on your iPad screen, and you then know before you sow your crop what you might need to add to the soils. And you can also do the other thing we can do now is that in some of our crops where we have irrigation, where we actually take water out of the ground here on our farm and spray it on the crops, just like you do in your gardens with sprinklers. So what we do is we actually have probes that are actually in the soil, in the places where we have irrigation. And that tells us whether or not it is actually dry or not, because we might think it's dry, but we don't need to water. We don't want to water if we don't need to. And in actual fact, we want to save, that uses energy too, watering, and it uses water. So if we don't need to water, we don't water. And so the probe tells us, it sends the information to our iPad screen. And then if we need to have a watering, we can do a watering. But if we don't, we don't. And then how exciting is that? So all of those things are just show you, they're just a taste of some of the very super cool things that we're doing on farm now and the ways technology is changing. If you remember back to that slide that I had near the beginning where we had the guy with the horse and he was pulling the cart. I mean, some of those things have changed so much now, and this technology that you're seeing is actually one of the reasons why people now are really interested in being a farmer. And we do come in all different shapes and sizes, and we love having new people involved in our industry. And so technology is really helping us. And it's super cool to see some of those things out there that I showed you on farms now. Right now on Australian farms, a lot of those things are happening right now, and it's just so exciting to see what's going to happen for the future as some of those technologies develop and we learn more and more and more about how technology helps us to keep growing the best food and fibre. And I might see if the kids have got any questions.
Fiona, Leo wanted to ask, what is your favourite farm technology?
I think for me, my favourite farm technology actually is the one with the weed, with the camera and the little tiny wee spots of chemicals. So that's so exciting for me because it enables us to actually have much healthier soils, and we know that we need healthy soils to grow food. And also to keep the moisture in the soil so we don't have to water as much, and also seeing how that technology is now changing. So now it's gone from just recognising a weed to actually recognising different sorts of weeds. And for different sorts of weeds, sometimes they need a different sort of weed killer. And so you're not wasting anything at all. You're using the minimum amount of weed killer, but you're actually still being able to then create really great food and fibre. So I think that's my most favourite piece of technology, and it's the one that when I talk to people who haven't been on farms before about some of the cool things that we do, it always blows their mind because they're thinking, wow, here's an infrared camera in a piece of machinery. How do farmers know about all this stuff? They look like that guy in the overalls with the pitchfork and the chalk. How could they possibly know anything about that? But in actual fact, it's very cool.
That does sound really cool. And it sounds like something that could be easily adaptable to many different farms too. Ryan has a question. Let's see if Ryan can unmute himself and lead with his question.
So Fiona, do you like being a farmer?
I love being a farmer. Thank you, Brian. And it's funny because there's so many different jobs to do on farms, and farming is a business as well. So we farmers love what we do, but we actually have to, make money like anybody else too. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to buy our food ourselves and have our houses and do what we do. So For me, there's so many different things to do on the farm. So I'm actually not the person who drives a lot of that cool machinery on my farm because I'm not very mechanical. So, some people like mechanical things and they love tinkering with all the underneath of cars and seeing where the oil goes in and all that sort of stuff. That's not me. I can change a tire on my car, but that's about as mechanical as it gets. But what I really like is the tech, and I really like working out how to sell all the things that we do. So looking at selling our product and how I can get the best sell it to the best markets to people who really want it. And I also really like talking about our family and how our family is actually involved in our farm, and whether we can turn some of the product. So instead of just growing chickpeas, for example, we'd quite like to turn our chickpeas into putting them into a box and selling them to people directly. And we quite like to turn them into a baked chickpea product. So I like all those things and sort of the businessy part of the farm, rather than actually going out and playing with machinery and oil and things. But I think Charlie actually likes the machinery and oil and things. So there's something for everyone, but that's one of the reasons I like being a farmer. And I really like, even though sometimes it's challenging because there's lots of things you can't control. So you can't control the weather unless you're the tomato farm in Port Augusta, and you can't control what they do in other countries across the world where we sell a lot of our products. The lifestyle's pretty good too. So you get to wake up out in the bush, you have lovely birds singing, and really makes you feel good inside. And then you get to play with the soil and you get to grow things, and that makes you feel good too. So I do like being a farmer.
Thank you. Ewan.
How many farmers are there?
In Australia, there's about 100,000 farmers now in Australia, maybe a little bit less than that. And the interesting thing is that you've got, the big map of Australia, when you think about that. So only 6% of that, it's a tiny little amount, we're actually what we call arable. So there's only 6% of Australia that you're actually able to grow crops like wheat and barley and chickpeas and cotton and all those sorts of different things. And so that's why it's really important that we actually now look at how we can grow in the future, food for the future. So things like the Port Augusta tomato farm, the Guyra tomato farm, the indoor, we can actually now grow leafy greens. So, like the bags of lettuce that mum might get, or the lettuces that you might get, you can actually grow those now, and they're growing them right in the middle of Sydney in a container. So, a big container that goes on a ship. People are using that now to actually help control and grow things. So we've got about 100,000 farmers, and those farmers employ quite a lot of people as well. So probably 3 times as many as that actually are people that work on farms. And then you've got to think of all the people that help farmers. So you've got agronomists who come and help us with our soils and our weeds and our nutrients, and you've got bankers who work with us to give us money, because sometimes we need money, particularly if we've been a bit challenged. And you've got scientists who come and help us with some of the cool technology. And you've got people like Telstra who actually help us with the connectivity, because there's no point having all these amazing cool tech things if we can't actually access their data. So there's lots of different people who work alongside farmers. And we're talking again about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who work alongside farmers to help us keep farming.
Wow, it's really interesting. And Charlotte has a question. Charlotte, can you unmute?
Why do you think it's important that kids know about farms?
I think it's important because we grow what you eat and we grow what you wear. And I can see your shirts and your uniforms and things are all natural fibres, and we know how great they are to wear. And I was actually watching Wild Weather last night on telly, and seeing they were talking about fires and wearing cotton and different things like that. So I think it's important that people understand what they're eating and how it's produced, because it's a really important thing that we keep sustainable. Australian farming has a real focus on making sure that we're really sustainable. We want to make sure that we leave our land in a better condition for the next generation than we had it. We want to make sure we can keep doing it as best as we can. And we need to make sure, I think, that people just don't get used to going into a supermarket or a shop and seeing the food there and thinking just thinking that that might be where it comes from, because sometimes it's a bit scary. We do some surveys and people don't really understand that milk comes from cows, and that cheese comes from cows, and that meat comes from lambs and cows. So I think we need to understand and remember where our food comes from. People need to make choices about that. And by talking to people also, quite selfishly, we want people to keep being really interested in being farmers, because we think that it's a really exciting career. We love what we do. Technology now is really changing it and making it available to everyone. So we want to make sure that people are interested in our industry and what we do. We want to make sure that we keep having people coming in, and that when you're at school there, maybe you might like to think about what, maybe being a farmer of the future and what that might look like. And by talking to people about what we do, then we can change some of the ideas that people have about the guy in the overalls with the pitchfork and the chook. It's not like that anymore. And so we have to keep talking to people and encouraging people to be farmers, and also so that people understand where their food and fibre comes from, and it doesn't just appear on a supermarket shelf.
Chloe, would you like to ask yours?
Do you think that farming in the future will have more technology?
So I do think thank you, Chloe, that's a great question. And I think right now we're seeing technology moving and changing the way we farm so quickly, and almost every day there's a new piece of technology here on farm. And that's the exciting thing for me. I was talking to you about the robotic weed killer. And we're seeing, the ones that drive themselves, like the picture I showed you, there's not heaps of those about yet, but they're starting to come out. And we're seeing, day by day by day, there's amazing technology. So it is, and I think the exciting thing for me is that it's moving so quickly that it is really changing the way we can do things on farm, and the way we can not just do things on farm, but the way we can better deliver our food to people as well. And so, with COVID, we've all been shut down, and sometimes we're really reliant on other countries for what we produce, which is fine, but it's challenging when we're all shut down. So what if we were actually able to do some more things here in Australia with what we grow? So instead of just sending off our raw product to overseas, like our raw, big shipfuls of wheat or big shipfuls of chickpeas, what if we were to actually change them into a nice little product here in Australia, and create that value in our country and then send it away? I mean, technology now can actually tell us how we can deliver those products. Technology can tell us about the supply chain. Technology can tell us about, connecting all those things up. And here on farm, technology really helps us to grow the best food and fibre, and that's what we want. So changing all the time.
That's great. That's exciting for our little young coders as well. That
Absolutely.
The future is theirs too. And Our final question from Cody.
How much technology do you use on your farm?
We use heaps, and it's just getting more and more and more. So we use so the machine that we use to harvest our crops is called a header. We call it a header here in Australia. So it's like sitting in a space machine. Truly, there's a big fire. So here on my farm, it's a family farm. So it's my husband and I. And when I married my husband, then it was his father. And now my son has come home as well. He's been off to university and studied agriculture. And now he's come home and he's got married too. So, and we have some people that work with us. And so here on my farm, when it comes to be time to harvest, there's almost an argument about who gets in the header, because it's so exciting. It's like sitting in a spaceship. You've got this whole amazing panel around you it's yield mod, so it tells you how much you're harvesting, what it did last year, what sort of quality it is. It's just all coming in, and there's screens everywhere. And because it's driven by the GPS, you don't have to touch the thing. You just drive it into the paddock. It wobbles around until it finds the track that it goes on, and then it drives. And you just sit there playing with them. Or it's much more technical than that, but it looks just like you sit there and play with all this cool stuff, and while it drives to the end of the paddock. And then you have to turn it around. That's the only thing that you have to do in ours. So that's very cool. And then when you go into a paddock with any of our machines now, whether it's the one that sows the seed or whether the one that kills the weeds or whatever it is, it does the same thing. So it drives into the paddock and it connects up to the satellite, and it downloads all the information about that paddock and what's in the paddock and what happened last year and what you might need to do, and sites it all up in the right spot to drive in and hands off again. And so then they make phone calls and they do all sorts of cool things too while they're sitting there. So I say to them, that's much easier than me, who has to run around and move tractors and check the bin and make sure that the silo is not too full and all of those things. But imagine if I had a nice little gadget on my silo that told me when it was getting full. I wouldn't have to go and do that. I could just key it in on my iPad. So here on my farm, lots of cool technology, not so much, more in the grains, I think, more like growing crops as opposed to the cattle and the livestock, although each of our cows now, and we're doing it, I thought you might hear some mooing actually. This morning we're weighing them. And so when the cows are actually coming in to be, because we're thinking that some of them are ready to sell. And so when they come into the yard, they've got a little chip in their ear. And so we scan the cow with this mobile scanning thing, like a stick. It looks like a stick, but it's got some cool coding in it. And it actually tells us what number that cow is and how much it weighed last time and how much it weighs this time. And then it all gets fed into our iPad. So very, very cool. Lots of technology on our farm and lots of technology that's used every day all over Australian farms. And we just want to keep encouraging people to get interested in coding, interested in science, interested in ag, interested in growing food and fibre. And because we think it's a really exciting future for Australia, and it's one of the things that's going to be really driving us in the future. We're going to have to keep growing food and fibre. We keep needing it. Australians always in demand, and we just want to keep more kids like you coming in and knowing what we do too, and wanting to be part of that.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for answering our questions. Nicola, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was wonderful. I certainly learnt a lot. That farm in Port Augusta sounds so interesting. I'm going to do some Googling later. That's all. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Can you guys give a big, thank you like this to Fiona? Perfect.
Thank you all very much for your questions. I love talking to you all about it. And I hope maybe some of you might think that you might like, look, some of them are so cool with their digital. They're actually putting applause up on the screen. They're
all over it.
I can never find the button. They're all doing it. I have enough trouble doing the mute and everything. But that's very cool. Thank you all very much. I hope some of you might think about maybe being a farmer in the future. And when you see those pictures of pitchforks and people with chooks under their arms, that's actually just the old days. That's not real. Think of something else. That's cool. Thank you so much. Thanks,
awesome.
Mrs. Fiona, for organising it.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.